Welcome to 2819. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher.
And we have a lot of deep topics for you today. Get your thinking caps on.
That's right. A lot of thinking, a lot of philosophy. It's going to be good. In Culture Talk, Sandra's going to be interviewing Professor of Ethics, George Haraksin, on the decline in U.S. church membership.
Yeah, crazy Gallup poll that just came out that shows that church membership has actually fallen below the majority. So definitely check that out. In Give and Take, Jeff will be talking with astronomer Hugh Ross about evidence for the cosmic inflation event. If you don't know what that is, definitely make sure you watch that segment because he'll explain it and show how that points to God as a creator.
It sounds really fun.
I know.
I kind of know what it is, but not sure, but I'm definitely going to check it out. First up, we have RTB 101. Krista's going to be speaking with philosopher and theologian Ken Samples on this really tough question: is Christianity hopelessly divided?
Let's check it out.
Now it's time for RTB 101, where we discuss practical questions to help equip you to share your faith more effectively. And here to help me talk about a very important topic today when sharing our faith is my colleague, philosopher and theologian, Kenneth Samples. Welcome, Ken.
Hi, Krista.
We're going to talk about a chapter from your book today, your brand new book. Maybe you can tell us first what the title of the book is and why you wrote it.
Yeah, the title is Christianity Cross-Examined. Is it rational, relevant, and good? And one of the reasons I wrote it is because I think today people not only have questions about the truth of Christianity, they have serious doubts about whether Christianity has been a good force in the world. So I look at both truth questions and moral questions.
That's really interesting, because there has been kind of a shift I've noticed in the recent decades where we used to talk in apologetics a lot about the question, does God exist? Now we're finding ourselves increasingly in conversations about, is God really good? Can we trust him? Yeah. So I'm imagining it addresses some of those questions.
Yeah, kind of a movement from modernism to postmodernism, if you will.
Yeah, that's good. Now, I saw that one of the chapters is entitled, Isn't Christianity Hopelessly Divided, or Christendom Hopelessly Divided? Yeah. I think it's a very provocative question. It really got my attention because that issue comes up a lot for me when I'm sharing my faith with non-Christians. They want to know, well, if Christianity is true, why are you so divided? I'm wondering if you've encountered that objection as well.
I have. In fact, I spoke with a person I think is a very thoughtful atheist, and he was very interested in my arguments for God. But at the end, he said, Ken, you make an interesting case, but which Christianity? It seems like they're all pulling in different directions. And so I've heard this from very thoughtful people who don't hold the Christian worldview.
That's interesting because I have as well. So maybe a place to start is, is that just a perception or is that a reality that Christianity is going in all of these different directions? Is there some foundation that unites us?
Yeah, I think it's part perception, but I do think that there is some reality to it, to be perfectly honest. Here's a quotation from C.S. Lewis that I like very much and agree with Krista. He said, when all is said and truly said about the divisions in Christendom, there remains, by God's mercy, an enormous common ground. And that's exactly right. If you look at the different branches of Christendom, Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, all of the conservative theological branches affirm kind of a theological groundwork. It's seen in the Nicene Creed, for example. We all believe we have deep connections on doctrine, on values, and in our basic worldview, the Trinity, the Incarnation, the Atonement, the Resurrection, our view of the Imago Dei, people are made in the image of God and have value, and then our view of worldview, that there is creation, fall, redemption, consummation. So I think non-believers kind of fail to see that critical common ground. But I also must say, there are Christians, it seems to me, sometimes they're even in my own denomination, that don't seem very interested in promoting unity and charity among Christians.
That's a really good point. I think that sometimes we fail to be vocal about the things that we do share in common.
Right.
And we fail to be specific about those things. It's not just, well, we all believe in Jesus. It's a
Right.
little bit more robust than that. And I like your mention of the Nicene Creed as being kind of an anchor point for us in the historic Christian faith. But also that we can recognize there are deep problems with divisions, and maybe more publicly, in particular, among Protestants in the Protestant branch of Christendom. And so I'm wondering if you've had any strategies over the years that have been helpful as you talk to people about these very real divisions.
Yeah, in my own personal ministry, and I really try to bring this to Reasons to Believe as well, I contend for the truth. I promote unity, and I try to strive to be as charitable as I can. I see myself as a peacekeeper, as an ecumenical Christian. And I think it's important to do all of those things. I mean, there are real differences. There's differences between what non-Christians believe and what Christians believe. Then on occasion, there are some fairly intractable issues amongst the three branches of Christendom. And then within Protestantism, there are differences. But, I try to bring them back to John 17, where Jesus prays that his church will be one as he and the Father are one. I also talk with them that you can understand all mysteries, but if you're not loving, that you've missed it in life. And so Krista, I intentionally try to address people and say, let's talk truth, let's talk unity, and let's be charitable with one another.
That's good. I know in my own personal ministry, a strategy that I found is bringing people back to what have Christians historically believed, particularly in the first 300 years of the church.
Yep.
And that helps to provide some guardrails, and it helps people see. I've had good success with this of like, hey, let's not look at the modern day in America. Like, I'll grant you, like, we're a mess,
Yeah.
but let's look back at the historic Christian church, kind of pre-Nicaea in those first 300 years, because there's a lot of things that we can agree on. I found that to be a very helpful strategy, kind of borrowing that from Dr. Tom Oden. I really like his approach.
Yeah. Very much. I love that approach because all of the branches of Christendom track back to that kind of foundational orthodoxy. I say that with a small o rather than Eastern Orthodoxy. But the Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Protestants track back to those fundamental Christian beliefs, creedal, what I would call historical or classical Christianity. We have the same views of God, the same views of Christ. And so I think that's a very wise way of approaching things.
Well, thanks, Ken, for helping us think through this very kind of tricky topic. I want to encourage our viewers, go check out Ken's blog called Reflections, and you can find that at our website at reasons.org.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with ethics professor and also a pastor for 20 years, George Haraksin. Thank you for joining us, George.
Thank you for inviting me, Sandra. I'm really excited to talk about this important topic.
Yes, we're here to talk about a recent Gallup poll, which found that for the first time in 80 years, church membership has actually dipped below 50%. So it's now below the majority. Can you explain what that percentage means?
Yeah, we've seen a steady decline in, notice it says membership, not necessarily belief or religious belief. But we've seen this sort of 80-year decline in membership. The study, I think, said we went from 69% in 1998 to 2000 regarding membership to down to 49% in 2018 and 2020. And the so-called nones, N-O-N-E-S, those who don't have a religious affiliation or who don't claim one, went from 8% in 1998 to 2000. And I think it went up to like 21% in 2018 to 2020. So at the same time, 7 in 10 in the US are affiliated with some type of organized religion, but now less than half have what we might call a formal membership or connection to churches. But remember also, it's not just Christian churches. It has to do with synagogue membership and membership amongst the Islamic community.
Right. And I think that's very helpful because for some reason people tend to think that it's just specifically talking about Christian churches, but it's talking really about all religions.
And there's one quick point here too. We've also noticed in various other studies that there's also a decline in formal membership in other areas of the culture as well, fraternal organizations, other civic organizations like Lions Club or what have you. So there's a broad cultural event going on.
So, part of the study, and I think we want to be careful that we're not panicking or anything, but one of the things that is mentioned in the study is that it's possible that the 2020, well, can't really say 2020 pandemic because here we are in 2021, but that the pandemic may have been one reason why there's a temporary decline. But they also state that they think a decline, a continued decline is inevitable. So pandemic or not, they're saying that they think the decline is inevitable.
Yeah, I think that's the case. There was a study done by some sociologists, Landon Schnabel and Sean Bach. They are at Indiana University and Harvard University, and they make a distinction that I think is helpful. They talk about those who are moderate in their religion, and those who are moderate, they don't have membership, etc. They don't attend weekly services, and that has declined since the 1980s and largely will continue to. However, what they call intense religion, which includes evangelicalism, has either stayed the same or there's some growth in that area. So people who have greater commitments, attachments to the church, we see those churches maintaining some membership, even possibly growing. And we also see a shift from people who might leave like a mainline church and who are more moderate sometimes then transfer over to a more intense religion, if you will, to other types of churches.
Interesting. So you're saying now like that in some cases we'll see kind of an increase, but overall we're seeing a decline. Yes. So I think that's something that people should be aware of, especially churches. And you as a former pastor for over 20 years, I would love your insight on what you think churches can do to really encourage church membership as opposed to just church attendance.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually know, and I think it's good for pastors and leaders to know this. We have some good empirical research on this, that research based off of what's called the General Sociological Survey seems to demonstrate strongly that if you have a strong relationship, that there's a strong relationship between church attendance and Christian practice, that's a well-established connection. So the more people are connected, participating in church, the more they start to live out their Christian practices. Sociologist Robert Wuthnow found that attendees are more likely to look to God for strength if they're regular attenders or church members. They tend to believe that God is watching over them. They carry their religious belief into other dealings in their life. They feel God's presence more. They find their religious commitment comforting. They desire closeness to God, a whole host of things and practices. So I would put it this way: one's belonging, that membership, affects one's believing, which affects one's behavior. And that's really important. So I think leaders and churches can raise the expectation of membership, show its value, its importance, how it actually affects how we believe and how we behave. And we used to require a class for membership, people who go through a process understanding what their expectations are, what the cost is, but also what the benefits are, and encouraging ministry involvement.
I'm wondering what you might say then for congregants. Like, how would you encourage congregants to help foster a more welcoming environment?
I heard one pastor put it this way. He used the phrase, and this is in regards to kind of following Jesus and being a part of church. He said, be one, build one, bring one. And the idea there is you got to be a disciple, a follower, a student of Jesus. It's important for you to be investing in other followers of Jesus to build them up. But this is an important part, I think, bringing someone, inviting someone with you. This makes you be the host or hostess, if you will, and you can create a welcoming environment because you're the host or the hostess, and you've invited this person to this church, and you can introduce them to other people and show them around. Or if it's just not, it has to do with the physical location, introducing them to other people. And so that does create a much more welcoming environment. Some of you know, I used to work for Disneyland Hotel, and we always talked about that issue of hospitality. But that is a value that's noted within the New Testament quite a number of times, that we are to become a hospitable people, showing hospitality, especially to the stranger.
Wonderful. Well, I think it's always great to be hospitable, and hopefully that will help people to explore church membership. So thanks so much for that, George. If you'd like to hear more from George Haraksin, go to reasons.org and search for George Haraksin.
Hello, Jeff Zwerink here. Welcome to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific ideas to help you be more convinced in the truth of Christianity. And today we're joined by colleague, friend, and president of Reasons to Believe, Dr. Hugh Ross, and we're going to discuss some new evidence for a cosmic inflation event. Hugh, it's good to have you here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jeff.
So it seems like there's a lot of stuff about cosmology that's just kind of settled and done. I mean, we live in a universe that's expanding, cosmic microwave backgrounds out there, universe is on the order of 14 billion years old. What is it that's new that lends insight into this discussion?
Well, what's new is we're now measuring the polarization features of the cosmic microwave background radiation to a higher precision. And that's giving us insights into the Big Bang creation model that we didn't have before.
Okay, so we've got this cosmic microwave background radiation that's left over from the early moments of the universe when it's incredibly hot and dense, pervasive throughout the universe, same in every direction, minor fluctuations. So when you talk about polarization and other things we're finding, what is it that they're measuring in the cosmic microwave background that's giving us this new insight?
Well, they're able to measure something called the scalar spectral index. That's basically looking at very tiny differences in the polarization of the temperature differences in the cosmic microwave background radiation. And the value that they get tells them whether or not there was an early inflation event in the history of the universe. And if so, roughly what kind of inflation event took place. And what's new is that this measurement from the Atacama Cosmology Telescope in Chile, combined with other measurements of the polarization of the cosmic microwave background, for the first time establishes that an inflation event did happen. Now, before it was at the point where we're saying, well, we got very strong evidence, but now the evidence is very compelling.
Okay, so let's explore this new telescope, because most of the CMB measurements we're doing are from space. How are they able to make good measurements from the ground, and what is it that they're actually being able to, or how do they compete with these other telescopes?
Well, they compete because they can put a lot more observing time towards it. That's especially important to get a good polarization measurement out. And so they found two places where they can be competitive with the space telescopes. One is at the South Pole, and one is at a high altitude dry desert site in Chile. In both cases, the goal is to observe in places where there's very little water vapor in the atmosphere. If there's almost no water vapor in the atmosphere and you don't get much atmospheric disturbance at the wavelength that's crucial, which is millimeter wavelengths. And so,
So
yes, it's the measurements from the South Pole and Chile that are giving us these new insights.
So presumably, so the idea is you're in a place, being out in space, there's no water vapor to absorb the wavelengths. But if you can find those few places on Earth where you don't have any water vapor, you can actually get as good a resolution. And so that's what they've done there in Atacama.
Correct, correct.
So what are some of the big findings that have come out of this telescope, just in general features?
Well, they've been able to come up with the most precise date for the age of the universe. They're now saying 13.791 billion years, plus or minus 0.021 billion. That's about twice as accurate as what we had a year ago. So that's a significant point. And as I mentioned, they're now able to measure the scalar spectral index to high precision, which tells us definitively that there is an early inflationary event in the universe. That's a cornerstone of Big Bang creation models that permit the existence of physical life. So that's a really important breakthrough. And now they actually have a measurement of the scalar spectral index that's sufficiently accurate that it's at the point of ruling out a simple inflation model and looking at the more complex inflation models. So that's comforting, realizing we've gone from simply saying it looks like there has to be an inflation event based on these measurements to where we're now actually identifying what kind of cosmic inflation event occurred.
So when you say it rules out the simple ones, it means it's more complex. What does that mean? How does that cash out in terms of what it looks like in the universe?
Well, probably means there's more than one constant that's governing the inflation, or more than one factor. I mean, the inflation event happens when the strong nuclear force separates out from the electroweak force, when the universe is about 10 to the minus 35 seconds old. And there's a variety of ways that separation can impact what's called symmetry breaking. And you got simple symmetry breaking and more complicated symmetry breaking. It looks like it's more complicated, which tells me as a Christian, there actually may be more than one design feature that's involved in this to make the universe habitable for advanced life.
So one of the features of inflation is that it produces a geometry for the universe that is very flat. I know that the Atacama Cosmology Telescope made a measurement of this parameter. Does it say we're flat like all the previous measurements?
It does, and so that's a nice consistency check. The fact that we have the scalar spectral index telling us there's an inflation event. We know if there's an inflation event, that's going to make the universe flat to a very high degree of measurement. And indeed, the Atacama Cosmology Telescope is indeed measuring a flat geometry to better than 3 places of the decimal.
Okay, so the Atacama Cosmology Telescope tells us that the universe is 13.8 billion years old, very similar to Planck, very similar to WMAP. Gives a flat geometry. Now taken with Planck and WMAP, establishes that the scalar index is not simple inflation. How does that relate to what Scripture says? Why is that important for Christians to know?
Well, long before astronomers realized that we live in a universe with constant laws of physics, that is expanding, that there's a beginning to space and time, that is dominated by thermodynamics. Hence, as the universe it gets colder and colder. I like to tell people it wasn't George Lemaitre or Edwin Hubble that discovered the Big Bang universe. Several Bible authors upstaged him by a couple of thousand years. And so coming up with more evidence for a Big Bang creation event does indeed establish that the Bible is always taught. As I've documented in the Fingerprint of God, when this was first becoming to be scientifically demonstrated, there was strong reaction from astronomers who didn't like Christianity, who didn't want the Bible to be established to be true. So that kind of confirms that indeed Big Bang cosmology is a biblical concept.
Well, thanks, Hugh. I appreciate your comments. You know, it really is fascinating that with science, we can actually investigate how this universe behaves. And the Bible talks about how this universe behaves. And what's fascinating is that as we probe and understand more and more scientifically how the universe behaves, it aligns with the biblical description. And that gives us great confidence that what the Bible has to say is true, not only about creation, but what it has to say about its creator. You know, I would encourage you to go to reasons.org and check out Hugh's latest blog on this topic. It's called New Telescope Observations Provide Cosmic Creation Confirmations. This will help equip you to know how to understand this important topic and how to use it to go out and share the gospel with those that God brings across your path.
That does it for us this week on 2019. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that it helped equip you to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And we hope that you'll find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819show. Let us know what you think of the show in this episode, and if you have any ideas for future topics.
Also, if you want the audio version of our show, you can get it on most major podcast services. Just search Reasons to Believe podcast.
See you next week.
Bye.